we're getting near the end of our time. I just want to add one more thought, and this is kind of a thought of my own. It's stimulated to some degree by your work, but it's a thought of my own, and that's about another reason why this colorblind, you called it colorblind, everyone would get upset if you use those words, why there's not focusing on the gaps between the races, but thinking about the structures that face individuals, and then thinking about what makes sense in terms of our reforms or whatever we want to do in terms of those structures, and where do these differences come from, and being candid and having a micro focus on those differences. And I think another reason to get out of the gap, the racial gap business, is political in the broadest sense of that term. It is making the discussion a discussion about human beings and not about groups. This is an anti-identity politics speech. People get mad. You're not supposed to say it. But that basically the frustrations that the limitations, the impediments, the unfairnesses and injustices, the disappointments, the lost opportunities that confront us are not racial. They are part of the human condition. There really is no justification for attacking Black poverty independently of attacking poverty. This is the argument that I'm going to try to fashion here. There's no justification for thinking about homelessness in racial terms. There is no justification for thinking about the extent of over-incarceration in the country, notwithstanding the huge racial disparity in its incidence. Primarily in racial terms, it's about how we as a country deal with our fellow citizens who have broken our laws and what's required of us and what's required of them. There's no justification for thinking about political representation. That is, the extent to which citizens have their membership in our political community effectively expressed in the deliberations of our government, primarily in racial terms. I know that's a radical thing to say, but I believe it to be true. The American Republic, structured and constructed in that way by seeing people as members of these groups, betrays the potentiality of the founding. That's, the founders were slave owners. I know that. I know that the founders were slave owners, but the founding was not a slave expression, and its instantiation in the 21st century and the hope that it has for the world is most effectively thought of in human and not racial terms. Clarence Thomas is right about that. Again, you all can get mad at me if you want to. This man who sits on the Supreme Court and has done so for a quarter century, who's 1/9 of 1/3 of the American state, who comes up out of the Sea Islands off of the coast of Georgia and is as Black and African-American as anybody will ever be, who addresses himself to fundamental questions of constitutional interpretation through the experience of his Black life, is right to interpret the founding of the US government in the late 18th century and the refounding of it in the middle of the 19th century, primarily in individual terms. That's the best path forward for this country. I know it's very controversial, but it's right. And therefore, if you take that philosophical premise, it is very natural to think about remedies for social inequality in individual and not in racial terms, to think about the loss to the country from unrealized human potential in individual and not racial terms. There are white people in the hill country of Eastern Kentucky. There are white people in the slums on the south side of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, or whatever it might be. There are white people who are unemployed in the small, dusty towns of the failing mining districts and so forth and so on. It's the wrong way to think about America. The fact that it has captured the imagination of woke progressives is much to their discredit.